Okay, Legend, directed by Brian Helgeland and written by him as well. He, of course, was one of the co-writers on LA Confidential. And it's the story of the Krays, told, as it happens, through the unlikely narration, nay, impossible narration, of Frances Shea, who was married to Reggie Kray. And so the story goes that Brian Helgeland wanted Tom Hardy to play Reggie, and Tom Hardy said he was more interested in Ronnie, who, of course, you know, is the loose cannon in all this equation. And so after they had a meeting in which it was apparent that that was what Tom Hardy really wanted to do, Brian Helgeland said, "Okay, fine, I will give you Ron if you give me Reggie." And they then decided to make the film very much as, for example, I mean, the example that they cite is Sam Rockwell in Moon, the Duncan Jones film. We were talking about Duncan Jones earlier on, but actually I think the closer call is Dead Ringers, in which Jeremy Irons plays both of the Mantle twins. And what we basically see is the Krays during the 1960s. We sort of bypass the backstory to some extent. We start with them already at some sort of level of gangland notoriety, being followed by the police, turf war starting to break out with the Richardson gang. And actually the central appeal of the movie is seeing Tom Hardy play these two characters as two completely different and totally polarised sides of the same personality. Reggie, as he is portrayed here, as being the sort of cool, calculating one. Ron, as he is portrayed here, as being the one who is completely out of control. Here, they meet some other gang members in a pub.
What is that?
Yeah, what do you think? It's a tool.
Oh, it's not. It's a rolling pin. Who are you, Fanny Craddock? What you do with that? You gonna bake me a cake? You gonna sing me a song, watch me blow out my candles? I come here for a shootout, right? A proper shootout with some proper men, like Colonel Custer and Geronimo. Have you ever heard of them? No. Because you were too busy in your pinny baking fairy cakes, weren't you? Call yourself a gangster. A shootout, right? It's a shootout! Like a Western.
Like a Western.
Shut it.
So,
shut it.
What Helgeland has done, you can tell this from the title. The title of the film is Legend, and there is absolutely no attempt really to undercut that. There has been, you know, endless talk about glamorization and not glamorization. This is the way this film plays out. Is it's not, it offers a very, very American take. I mean, the whole point of it is,
what does that mean?
Well, what it means is that in the film they view themselves as sort of local heroes, as superstars, and the film sort of therefore surrounds them with a world in which that were true. So I would say, rather than The Long Good Friday, the reference points would be like White Heat and Scarface, and also, bizarrely enough, Sunset Boulevard. It's a film which is dealing with mythology and is not to any great extent undercutting that mythology. Certainly, if what you want is something that takes apart the Krays legend and says, in fact, this is really, you know, the story of two very nasty individuals, you're not going to get that. The film is, for whatever else anyone thinks about it, it is kind of infatuated with the Krays and with the mythology of the Krays, which is it's a weird part of sort of British cultural iconography. There's a famous quote by David Bailey that he said the mistake they made was posing for him for his photographs, because he said actually, in terms of, you know, real gangsters are people who keep a low profile. Actually, by wanting to become celebrities, that was the beginning of their undoing. So the film itself is very sparkly, very spangly, lots of interiors in nightclubs, lots of, you know, chandeliers, lots of glitter, lots of pizzazz, lots of shots of London streets looking unfeasibly sort of 60s swinging, attractive. And the film itself, actually, I have to say, is entertaining, if utterly fanciful, and in some ways rather faintly ridiculous. It's also surrounded by this kind of catalogue of semi-cartoonish, semi-caricatured supporting performances, something which incidentally is kind of, to some extent, germane to the subject, because when you have characters like, you know, like the policeman is Leonard Nipper Reed, and then there's, you know...
What are you going to say is Leonard Nimoy? Leonard
Nimoy, yes, and, you know, Jack the Hat McVitie. When the characters are sort of... They are like cartoon characters as far as what they're actually referred to in real life is concerned. It's perhaps unsurprising, then, that when David Thewlis or Christopher Eccleston... I mean, Paul Bettany at one point turns up as the, you know, a member of the rival gang, and it's a Paul Bettany sort of small role that made me think, to some extent, oh, this is going towards the territory of gangster number one. It isn't. I mean, it looks to me absolutely like it's a film which has its eye on an international market, which is kind of selling the legend perhaps to people who don't actually know the nuts and bolts of the story. And right at the centre of it is this dual performance by Tom Hardy, which is very, very watchable, partly because it's interesting to see how he completely splits the characters apart. I mean, it's a credit to the film that you don't spend much time thinking that's an interesting shot. How have they done that? Because there's one point in which they actually have a fist fight with each other. They do spend a lot of time battling with each other. And there is one point in which there is Tom Hardy wrestling with himself, having a fist fight with himself. But so on the one hand, you've got the character of Reggie, who is nominally the sort of, the publicly acceptable face. And as I said, the story is told to us, narrated to us impossibly by Frances Shea. Emily Browning plays the character as sort of, fragile, which is quite right. But she has to read this unbelievably ripe voiceover, which is full of stuff about gangster princes and, all that sort of stuff. I mean, I think it's brilliant that she managed to get through it with a straight face, because the voiceover is risible. I mean, there's no two ways about it. But the Tom Hardy performance, so you have the Reginald performance, which he said was, to some extent, he found the less interesting or the more difficult character, because he seems so straight, and he's dealing with Chaz Palminteri, who are the mafia, who will deal with him but can't understand Ron. Then on the other hand, you've got the Ron performance, which in its strangest moments looks like Matt Lucas doing an impression of Mark Lamar, or Peter O'Hanrahan from The Day Today, or even, I think, as you heard from that clip, there's a little bit of Steve Coogan's Alan Partridge in there. That sort of, it's almost like a comic performance. There is something Little Britain-y about it, and oddly enough, the film itself doesn't shy away from being comic. There's violence and there's grotesquerie, but actually the tone of it is essentially flimsy and flashy and cartoony, and at the centre of it, it's held together by Tom Hardy. I mean, I think Tom Hardy's a terrific actor, and he gives a dynamite performance in what is essentially a pretty insubstantial and superficial, but shiny superficial film.